Alright, this video is going to go over how to install and configure sudosh2. Sudosh2 is a program that will allow us to record the keystrokes that the users who use that shell type into the system. So we're going to install that. Couple things to know. Most of the times we install things, we are using Yum. For this particular software, we're going to have to compile it, which is a good skill to have. So we're going to download the code, compile it, and then configure it. Those are the steps we're going to take in this case. So I'm on the GitHub page, and there's a couple different ways we could get the code. One, we could download the zip to our server and then unzip it and get it that way. But we're going to use the more sophisticated way of getting it, which is to use Git. So Git is a software repository management. How do I want to phrase that? Source code management tool. So in theory, if you were writing code in a big project, you could write your code locally and then use Git to upload your code to the repository. You use Git to download the most recent code from the repository. So we're going to use Git. To do that, we need to install Git. I am currently already logged into my server as my regular user. So anything I need to do, I need to use sudo, or I just need to become root. I'm going to try to use sudo because that's the best practice, but it annoys the crap out of me most of the time. So I will probably end up switching to root before I'm done. So we installed Git. The command was yum install Git. It's getting all the dependencies we need. Once we download Git, we will use it to download the code we need. And I don't know if you saw, but I went ahead over here and highlighted this whole thing and copied it because I'll need that for the next step. Never fails that when I'm trying to do a video, something hangs and takes a while to finish. So, okay, there we go. It's moving now. Is that an error? Error. Yeah, so we had an error and then it went and got the right thing we needed. So that's fine, probably. All right, so now it's installed. So now we want to use Git to download the code, and the Git command to download code is clone. So that works. So now if I do ls, I see I have a sudo_sh2 directory. So I'm going to cd into that directory. And when you download code from somewhere, there's usually a couple files you want to look at. One would be the install file, and one would be the README file. We'll look at the README file first. So introduction, blah, blah, blah. And here's what I'm looking for. This gives me the installation steps. Compile sudo shell, /configure, make install sudo_sh-i. When you run /configure, that's actually running a script that comes down with the code. So there it is right there. We could look at that script and see what it's doing. And these scripts are usually pretty intense if you're intimidated by code. That's shell code. That's pretty intense. So we'll run that. And what it's going to do is it's going to try to make sure we have everything we need to install, to compile the code. And if we look, it's like error, no acceptable C compiler found in path. And it looks for the particular compilers that it can use. And we don't have any of them. So we're going to install GCC. And I almost forgot sudo. So we're going to install GCC, which is the C compiler, the open source GNU C compiler. So it's going to install, and then we'll run configure again. And after we do that, hopefully it will actually compile the software. So configure. So it's checking all this stuff, and hopefully it's going to work. So there we go. Configuration summary. It puts a bunch of stuff it figured out. We could have specified some other things. So that looks all good. So now we're going to do make. Make is actually going to install the software. Not install. Make actually does the compile. Configure, make sure you have the prerequisites you need to configure it. and then make will actually compile it. Here's a bunch of GCC commands that are compiling the code. So that finished successfully. So now we need to install, and normally you need sudo for that because it has to copy the files over. So sudo make install. So that installed it, which basically just copied the code from the directory where we compiled it over to where it needs to go. And then the other command it said we needed to run was sudo sh-i. So I'm afraid this one might not work. Yeah, so that one did not work as my regular user. So what it's trying to do is create this log directory which does not exist. So it tells you right here it needs to exist and be created by root. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to use sudo to run that command again. And now, since it's doing it as I'm going to put the full path to sudo shell and run that command again. And now it did that thing it needed to do. So if you do not get this log directory created, when you try to run sudo shell as your regular user, it's not going to work. So that took care of the installation process. The next step we need to do is configure our users to use that shell. So the way we're going to do that, user mod command. I'm using sudo again, user mod dash a to append. That's not what I want to add. Dash s is for shell. How do I know dash s is for shell? Well, I just know. But you can use the man page to find what you're looking for. So in this case, if I read these options, inactive, GID, groups, lock, move, non-unique, root, prefix, shell, dash s is for shell. So user mod dash s, user local bin sudo shell. So, and then I want to put the username. So be very careful how you type this. Note, there is no E in user. It's USR. Every semester somebody puts an E in there. Messes it up. Oh, check that out. I need sudo. Ugh. This is why I always run as root, because I always forget sudo. So now my user has been changed. So I'm going to be smart and test my connection before I disconnect, because if you watch my other video, that's how I told you not to lock yourself out. So I'm going to try to SSH in, put my passphrase, and it looks like it logged in, but then I get an error message that says user local bin is not in Etsy shells. So I'm just going to be root from now on because I'm tired of this. So I need to edit Etsy shells, and this is a file that contains a list of things that are valid login shells. And I need to put user local bin sudo shell in there. So if you do not put this in Etsy shells, you will not be able to log in. And if you log out after you change your shell, basically if you don't use two windows to test, you'd be out of luck right there right now for fixing your system very easily. So now that I put that in Etsy shells, I get logged in. The last thing we need to fix is this prompt doesn't look like what our prompt is supposed to look like. So you just have to believe me for this because there's no way you would have known this. But there's a sudo shell config file. And in here there's a default shell setting, and it's just running the standard shell and not the born again shell. So we want to change that to bash. And this file does not have permissions for us to write to it. So if I try to write and quit, it's going to be like, oh, hey, it's read only. So what we're going to do is we're going to write and quit and put an exclamation point that means, hey, I really, really, really want you to save that file. And that works because we are operating as root. So now we will exit and we will try it again. And hopefully this time everything will look like normal. So yeah, so now I'm logged in using the sudo shell, and if I look in the password file, we'll see that I'm using the sudo shell. So that is what you needed to do to get that installed and configure. The security standard says other users are supposed to be using the sudo shell, so we also want to give the sec team the sudo shell, which is -s user local bin sudo shell sec team. And I'm not sure if I said root needed a sudo shell or not. So if the standard says root needs it, give it to root. If it doesn't mention root, you don't have to give it to root. So now that the shell is installed and configured and ready for us to use. But you might be asking yourself, okay, Rich, it records our keystrokes. How do we find that stuff out? Well, if you run the command sudo shell replay, let me make sure I exit out of my session over here. Yeah, I'm going to exit out of this session. It shows you the sessions that have been recorded. So here are my 2 sessions. If I want to replay one of them, I copy this session ID. I paste that session ID. And then there are 2 numbers at the end. One number is the multiplier for how fast you want it to go. So if I want it to play 4 times as fast so I can see what's going on, I can put a 4 there. That's what I normally do. I'll just do 2. And then this last second number is how long you want it to wait. So if you want it to wait when the user's not typing, you can put a number there, but putting 0 causes it to not wait and basically skips dead space. So if I run that command, you can see, hey, look, it's replaying the session I just did. So if you look back over my session, I did ls and then I cat etsy password. So that's a way if you want to be able to track what your users are doing, you can use sudo shell for that. And that is the end of what we needed to do for this part of the assignment.